Carla arrived at the office in a hurry, as if she had just left one meeting and was about to enter another. Her hair was impeccably tied up, and she held a cup of coffee in her right hand, while her left hand carried a bulky planner. Her expression, however, betrayed the composure she was trying to demonstrate. There were dark circles under her eyes, a slight tremor in her hands, and a rapid breathing that she seemed to ignore. "Sorry I'm late," she said as she entered the room. "I was in the middle of a call with a client, and it took longer than expected. But I'm here now, ready to start." The psychologist smiled, understanding, and gestured for her to sit down. He watched as Carla adjusted her cup and planner on the side table next to the chair. It was clear that she was uncomfortable with the idea of being there, of dedicating an hour exclusively to herself. After a few seconds of silence, Carla took a deep breath and began to speak. "Look, I don't know exactly why I'm here. My boss suggested it. My friends agreed, and even my mother gave me her typical hint. They said that I need to take care of myself, but honestly, I don't have time for that." The psychologist kept his gaze welcoming. "I understand, but if you don't have time to take care of yourself, who or what do you have time for?" Carla laughed nervously. "For everything and everyone. My work, my team, my clients, my family, my friends, and of course, all the little things that need to be done. There's always something that needs my attention. If I stop, it feels like everything will fall apart." The psychologist leaned forward slightly, showing interest. "And how do you feel now, with all this in mind?" Carla hesitated. She seemed uncomfortable with the question, as if she wasn't used to reflecting on her own emotions. After a moment, she answered, "Exhausted, but I feel guilty saying that, because I have so much to be grateful for. My work is going well, my family supports me, and I have amazing friends. But even so, I feel empty." She paused for a moment and looked away. "You know what's weird? I hate not having anything to do. Like I hate it. If I have a free day, I feel anxious, like I'm wasting time, so I fill it with anything. I clean out my closet, answer old emails, start planning for the next month, and still it doesn't feel like it's enough." The psychologist nodded, allowing Carla to continue. He knew she needed to vent, even if she wasn't yet completely clear about what was really bothering her. "I can't stop," she continued, "and at the same time, I know I'm at my limit. I wake up tired, I go to bed exhausted, and I still feel like I haven't done enough. It's like I have an endless list of things to do, and I never get to the end of it. My boss always says I'm the most productive person he knows, but honestly, I don't know if I can keep going like this." The psychologist paused, giving Carla room to breathe. He could tell that her exhaustion wasn't just physical, but emotional and mental. Finally, he asked, "Carla, what do you think would happen if you stopped? If, for one day, you let go of all those lists and responsibilities?" She laughed, but there was a note of panic in her voice. "I'm sorry, but that's impossible. If I stop, everything will fall apart. My team will be lost, my clients will complain, my house will be a mess. Plus, I wouldn't know what to do. I think I'd go crazy just thinking about what I'm not doing." The psychologist kept his tone calm. "I understand. But from what you're telling me, it sounds like this need to be busy all the time isn't really doing you any good. You said you feel empty, exhausted, anxious. Maybe this constant busyness is covering up something deeper, something that, if faced, could bring you more balance." Carla was silent, staring at her coffee cup as if searching for an answer there. Finally, she said, "Maybe, but honestly, I don't know if I can. Being busy is all I know how to do." The psychologist smiled slightly. "I get it, Carla, and that's not uncommon. Many people become addicted to being busy because they feel like if they stop, they'll lose control. But here's the thing. Being constantly busy doesn't mean you're in control. In fact, it can be quite the opposite." Carla looked up, surprised by the statement. Something in those words seemed to resonate. She sighed, for the first time that day, letting the weight lift a little. "So what do I do?" The psychologist calmly responded, Let's start by understanding why you feel this need to be busy all the time, and together we'll work to help you find the balance you deserve. At the next session, Carla entered the office looking different. She didn't have her bulky planner with her, but she was still holding a cup of coffee. There was something in her eyes that indicated she had been thinking about their last conversation. After sitting down, she began talking before the psychologist even asked a question. "I've been thinking about what you said about being busy and how that can't mean control. And, I think you're right. I've been living this way for so long that I don't even know where to start to change." The psychologist nodded. "That's normal, Carla. A lot of people find themselves in this pattern. But let's start at the beginning. When did you realize this need to be busy all the time started?" Carla thought for a moment, fiddling with the strap of her bag. "I think it started in college. I've always been the person who did everything. I was the leader of study groups. I had 3 internships at the same time, and I was still helping my family at home. It felt like if I wasn't doing something, I was wasting my time." She paused before continuing. "After I graduated, things just got more intense. My first job was at an advertising agency, and it was your typical high-pressure environment. I loved the adrenaline rush at first. I felt like I was being productive, that I was valued. But over time, I realized that it was never enough. There were always more and more demands, and I kept saying yes to everything." The psychologist asked, "And how did you feel about saying yes to everything?" Carla gave a bitter laugh. "At first, fine. It was like every single thing I did was proof that I was competent, that I was in control. But after a while I started to feel exhausted. Still, I couldn't stop. I was afraid of letting people down, of seeming weak or irresponsible." The psychologist watched Carla carefully as she spoke. "It seems that being busy has become more than a routine. It's become part of how you define yourself. It's like you need it to feel useful or valuable." Carla nodded slowly, clearly absorbing what he said. "That's it. I guess without realizing it, I've started to measure my worth by how much I get done. The fuller my schedule, the more in control I feel of my life." The psychologist asked another question. "And what is it like for you when your schedule isn't full? When do you have a moment of silence or rest?" She looked away and answered hesitantly, "Horrible. I start to feel useless, like I'm wasting my time. I get anxious, irritable. I've tried taking a vacation, but by the 3rd day, I'm answering emails or thinking about projects. I can't switch off." The psychologist thought for a moment before answering. "Carla, what you describe is very common in people who develop what we call busyness addiction. It's like any other addiction. The brain gets used to seeking the feeling of reward that comes from productivity. Each task completed releases dopamine, the pleasure hormone. But over time, the brain demands more and more to maintain this feeling. The result is that you feel compelled to fill every free moment with something useful, even if it's exhausting you." Carla was silent for a few seconds, processing what she had just heard. Finally, she asked, "So that's it? Is my brain tricking me into thinking that being busy is good for me, even when it's not?" "In a way, yes," the psychologist replied, "but it goes deeper than that. Being busy all the time can also be a way of avoiding dealing with uncomfortable emotions. When you're busy, you don't have time to think about things that bother you, like insecurities or fears. It's like your busy schedule is a shield." Carla seemed uncomfortable with this idea. "I've never thought of it that way, but it makes sense. I've always been good at avoiding thinking about what bothers me. Maybe that's why I never stop. If I stop, everything I try to ignore will catch up with me." The psychologist kept his tone welcoming. "That's understandable, Carla. But here's the thing. Whatever you're avoiding won't go away just because you're busy. On the contrary, these emotions tend to build up, and the impact shows up in other ways, like anxiety, insomnia, or emotional exhaustion. Facing these issues may seem scary, but it's the only way to break this cycle." Carla sighed, but there was something in her expression that seemed more open, as if she was beginning to understand the depth of the problem. "So, where do I start? Because honestly, it seems impossible to stop right now." The psychologist smiled slightly. We start small. With small moments of pause, we will learn to slow down without guilt and begin to create a space where you can simply be, without the need to always do. The resilience you showed by staying busy can also be used to transform yourself. Carla leaned forward, interested. Okay, small steps. I think I can try. The psychologist concluded the session by saying, and that's all we need for now. Try. The next session, Carla seemed more restless than before. Although she had promised the psychologist that she would try to slow down, something in her expression suggested that she had not. As she sat down on the couch, she let out an exasperated sigh. I tried, she began, crossing her arms. I really tried to stop. You told me to set aside 5 minutes a day to do nothing. 5 minutes. And I couldn't. The psychologist kept a warm look on her face and gestured for her to continue. I sat on the couch without my phone, without anything. For about 2 minutes it was strange, but tolerable. But then my mind started racing. I remembered an email I hadn't sent, a text I'd forgotten to reply to, and that I hadn't scheduled my dentist appointment. I started to feel anxious, like I was wasting time, so I got up and went straight to the computer. I can't sit still. She seemed frustrated, almost annoyed with herself. The psychologist waited a few seconds before responding. Carla, I realize this was hard for you, but tell me, what do you think happened in that moment of pause? Carla thought for a moment, fiddling with the rings she was wearing. I think it was like my mind wouldn't stop. It felt like something was wrong, like I was breaking an invisible rule by not doing anything. The psychologist leaned forward slightly, showing interest. And where do you think this feeling that stopping is wrong comes from? Carla shook her head, confused. I don't know. I've always been like this. Ever since I was little, I was always busy. My mother used to say I was a little ant, always finding something to do. But if I think about it, I guess I was always afraid of seeming lazy. My family always valued hard work, you know? As if someone's worth was measured by how hard they worked. The psychologist nodded, encouraging Carla to continue. She seemed to be starting to connect the dots. In school, I was the student who did all the group work. At work, I was always the one who stayed late. I guess, deep down, I always felt that if I wasn't busy, people would think I wasn't good enough. The psychologist took the moment to reflect. So being busy all the time became a way of proving your worth. It's as if, by always doing something, you are telling the world and yourself that you are important, that you are capable. Carla nodded slowly. That's it. And the worst part is that even though I do everything, I still feel like it's never enough. There's always something else I should be doing. The psychologist paused before answering. That's the whole point, Carla. When the value you give yourself is tied exclusively to your productivity, it never feels like enough. Because deep down, it's not about what you do. It's about how you feel about yourself. And that's what we need to start working on. Carla seemed to absorb the words, but there was still resistance in her gaze. But how do I do that? If I stop, what will happen to my work, to my life? And besides, I don't know who I am without being busy. It's like I have no purpose if I'm not doing something. The psychologist smiled gently. That's very common, Carla. Many people feel lost when they start to slow down because what they've been avoiding finally comes to the surface. That's why the process of slowing down should be gradual. It's not about stopping completely, but about creating small spaces for yourself to start reconnecting with who you are beyond everything else you do. Carla shook her head, clearly still struggling with the idea. I just don't know if I can. I've always been this way. What if I just can't change? Carla, the psychologist said firmly but gently, change doesn't happen all at once. It's like learning something new. You don't become fluent in a language overnight, right? The same goes for slowing down. And it all starts with one small step. Like, what do you think you can do today that isn't too scary, but that will help you start creating that space? Carla thought for a moment. Maybe I could try the 5 minutes again, but this time I could put on some music or something. Maybe that will help me not feel like I'm wasting time. The psychologist nodded. Great, let's start with that. And remember, it's not about perfection. It's okay if your mind wanders or if you don't succeed every day. The important thing is the intention to try, to start changing this relationship with time and your productivity. Carla took a deep breath, seeming a little calmer. Okay, I'll try again. When she left the office that day, Carla still had doubts, but there was something different. The small spark of hope that maybe it would be possible, little by little, to start slowing down. In the next session, Carla seemed different. There was a less intense restlessness, but it was still present. As soon as she sat down on the couch, she looked at the psychologist and began speaking, almost without pausing. I did the exercise. I set aside 5 minutes, put on some calming music like you suggested. And well, at first it was strange. But then I started to feel something different, like it was a relief, but also uncomfortable at the same time. It's hard to explain. The psychologist smiled slightly. Strange, relief, discomfort. That's a good start. You allowed yourself to stop for a moment. But tell me, what went through your mind while you were doing that? Carla thought for a few seconds, playing with her hair. It was like my mind was on a roller coaster. First, I thought about what I had to do the next day. Then I remembered an argument I had with my boss last week. Then, all of a sudden, I started thinking about things that I don't even know why they came to the surface, like that project I failed in college and how terrible I felt at the time. She paused before continuing, her voice lower now, and that's when I realized something. I think I avoid being still, because when I do, all these things come flooding back. It's like I'm running away from them all the time. The psychologist nodded, validating her perception. That makes a lot of sense, Carla. The habit of being constantly busy is often a way of avoiding thoughts and emotions that can be uncomfortable. Being busy becomes a protective mechanism, a way to distract yourself from what's really going on inside you. Carla seemed to think deeply about what he said. So, I'm keeping myself busy to avoid facing these things? That sounds kind of cowardly, doesn't it? The psychologist immediately intervened gently. Not at all. It's a strategy that you've developed over time to deal with difficult situations. It's not about being a coward, but about surviving. Now, what we can do is start exploring these emotions little by little, so that you no longer have to rely on this constant busyness as a shield. Carla shook her head, looking intrigued, but also a little scared. Okay, but how do I do that? Because honestly, just thinking about dealing with all these things makes me want to run away. This reaction is completely normal, the psychologist said in an encouraging tone. And that's why the process needs to be gradual. We don't need to dive straight into the deeper issues. Let's start by identifying what exactly you feel when these thoughts arise. For example, when you remembered your college project, what was the predominant emotion? Carla looked thoughtful. I think it was shame. At the time, I felt like I had failed, that I wasn't good enough, and I think I still carry that feeling today. Right, the psychologist replied. Shame is a powerful emotion, and it often makes us want to run away. But instead of running away, what happens if you look at that shame with curiosity? Ask yourself, what is this emotion trying to teach me? How can I deal with it differently now as an adult? Carla frowned, clearly processing the idea. I've never thought of shame that way. I've always wanted to get rid of it as quickly as possible. But are you saying I should listen to it? Exactly, the psychologist said. Emotions, even uncomfortable ones, have something to teach us. In the case of shame, it can be an invitation to revise your expectations of yourself. Maybe at the time you were too hard on yourself, or maybe you internalized a mistake as if it were a character flaw, which it isn't. Carla sighed deeply, as if feeling the weight of what he was saying. Okay. So if I start identifying these emotions and trying to understand what they mean, will it help me stop filling every waking moment with tasks? I did what you suggested. I took a few minutes to identify what I was feeling during the moments when I was trying to stop. It was in... Yes, the psychologist replied. Because once you start dealing with your emotions instead of avoiding them, the need to be constantly busy diminishes. You'll find that you can take moments of pause without feeling guilty or anxious. Carla smiled slightly, a little hopefully. That sounds possible. Difficult, but possible. And that's exactly how it starts, the psychologist said. The next step is to keep creating those moments of pause, and when the emotions come, to approach them with curiosity instead of judgment. If you need to, write down what you're feeling and reflect on it later. And remember, there's no rush. This is a process, and every little step counts, Carla nodded. I'll try. I can't promise it'll be easy, but I think it's worth it. As she left the office, Carla felt like she was beginning to understand something she had never realized before. Maybe, instead of running away from her emotions, she could start to move toward them, and in doing so, maybe, just maybe, she could finally find the peace she'd been searching for. Carla returned to the office the following week with a look of mixed anxiety and determination. "Sat tense," she said, letting out a sigh. The therapist leaned forward slightly, interested. "Intense? How?" Carla played with her hair, visibly uncomfortable. "At first, it seemed impossible. Every time I tried to sit still, the list of things I should be doing would come flooding back into my head. It was almost like the pause was a trigger for a mental whirlwind." She paused before continuing. "But I remembered what you said about not judging your emotions and just observing them. So I started writing. I wrote down what I felt and tried to name each emotion. There were times when I felt guilty, anxious, and even angry with myself for not being able to relax." The psychologist smiled slightly, acknowledging Carla's effort. "That's huge progress, Carla. You've started to create space to observe your emotions without running away from them. And what have you discovered during this process?" Carla thought for a moment before answering. "I think I've realized that I'm always trying to prove something, to myself, to others. It's like if I'm not busy, I'm not good enough. It sounds so irrational when I say it out loud, but that's how I feel." The psychologist maintained a reassuring tone. "That's not irrational, Carla. It's a belief you've developed over time. Often these beliefs come from past experiences. You mentioned that hard work was always highly valued in your family. Maybe without realizing it, you've internalized the idea that you have to be productive in order to earn respect or validation." Carla nodded in agreement. "Yes, I think that's it. But how do I start to change this? Because even though I know it's something I carry from the past, it's still hard to let go." The psychologist smiled encouragingly at Carla. "We start exactly as you're doing now, recognizing the pattern and creating small changes. We'll build your ability to be present in the moment, without the need to fill every second. I'll suggest some practical exercises that can help you gradually slow down. 1. Planned breaks. I want you to continue setting aside 5 minutes a day to do nothing, but now with a clear goal, to observe what comes up. Don't worry about trying to change or fix anything. Just record the thoughts and emotions that come up. Think of it as a way to explore what's going on internally." Carla nodded, writing it down on her phone. "Okay, 5 minutes a day." 2. The power of no. We're also going to work on your relationship with external demands. Busyness is often the result of saying yes to everything. I want you to practice saying no to commitments that are not a priority. This may feel uncomfortable at first, but it is essential to creating space in your life. Carla let out a nervous laugh. "I'm terrible at saying no, but I think I can try." D. Practice mindfulness. Another powerful tool is mindfulness. Choose a simple activity, like eating your morning coffee or brushing your teeth, and try to do it with full attention. Notice the tastes, textures, sounds. This helps train your mind to be in the present, reducing the need to constantly think about the next step. Carla looked intrigued. "I've never thought of something as simple as that. but I guess it makes sense. 4. Identify your priorities. Finally, let's work on your relationship with your tasks. Make a list of everything you think you need to do in a day. Then, choose 3 things that are really important and focus on them. Anything that is not essential can be postponed or even eliminated. Carla raised her eyebrows. Only 3 things? That's going to be a challenge. The psychologist smiled. That's exactly why it's so important. When you reduce your list, you learn to prioritize and deal with the feeling that not everything needs to be done at once. The following week, Carla came back with a mix of positive reports and challenges. I managed to set aside the 5 minutes and did the breakfast exercise. It was easier than I imagined and even enjoyable, But practicing no was horrible. I felt guilty the whole time. That's completely normal, the psychologist replied. Saying no is uncomfortable at first because it goes against the patterns you've carried for so long. But constant practice will help change this relationship. Carla sighed, but seemed more confident. I can see that it is possible, even if it takes time. For the first time, I think I am learning to slow down. Reflection, Carla began to realize that, although it was uncomfortable, slowing down was making room for something new in her life, moments of connection with herself. She was no longer filling every minute out of obligation, but was beginning to consciously choose where she put her energy. Small steps were turning into a bigger journey. At the next session, Carla entered the office with a shy smile. There was something different about her, a lightness that had not been present during the first visits. As soon as she sat down, she said with a hint of pride, "I think I am starting to understand what you meant about slowing down. It is still difficult, but some things have started to change." The psychologist nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Tell me more. What has changed for you?" Carla settled back in her chair and began to explain. "Well, first of all, I finally managed to commit to taking a 5-minute break every day. At first it seemed pointless, but now it's like my own little refuge. I don't get as anxious during those moments anymore. Instead, I've started using that time to breathe and think about what really matters." She paused, clearly reflecting on what she had achieved. "And you know what I realized? That many of the things I did every day weren't really that important. It was like I was filling my time just for the sake of it, but without any clear purpose." The psychologist took this opportunity to delve deeper. "That's a powerful insight, Carla. When we keep ourselves busy all the time, we often lose connection with what really matters. Have you been able to identify something that's important to you?" Carla smiled slightly, almost as if she was proud of herself. "Yes. I realized that I was prioritizing other people's demands and forgetting my own. For example, I always accepted extra tasks at work, even when it wasn't my responsibility. I used to do this because I was afraid of looking incompetent or lazy. But now I've started to think, is this really necessary? Do I want to do this?" She took a deep breath before continuing. "Last week, my boss asked me to organize a presentation that wasn't even part of my job description. Normally, I would say yes right away. But this time, I took a deep breath and said, I can help with some ideas, but I can't take on the whole project. And guess what happened? He didn't get mad. He just asked someone else to take care of it." The psychologist smiled, pleased. "That's fantastic, Carla. You were able to establish a healthy boundary without compromising your work. And how did you feel when you did that?" "I felt relieved," Carla replied. "It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I realized that saying no doesn't mean I'm failing. It means I'm respecting myself." Carla also started to notice changes outside of work. Before, I was always rushing from one commitment to the next. She always accepted invitations from friends, even when she was exhausted. But now, I've started to be more selective. Last Friday, I had a dinner with some friends, but I was really tired. Instead of forcing myself, I texted them to explain that I needed a night to rest. And they understood. She paused, smiling. I spent the night watching a movie and reading a book that had been on my shelf for months. It was so good. I felt like I finally had time for myself. The psychologist reflected, Carla, what you're describing is the essence of balance. You're learning to say yes to what really matters, to you. This is something that many people have difficulty doing, but it's essential to finding a healthier rhythm in life. Carla shared another significant moment. I took the weekend for myself. It wasn't easy, I admit. On Saturday morning, I felt that familiar guilt for not doing something productive, but instead of ignoring it, I sat down and wrote about it. I realized that my guilt stemmed from the idea that if I wasn't busy, I wasn't valuable. She looked at the psychologist with a twinkle in her eye. But then I asked myself, does my productivity define who I am? And I realized that it doesn't. I spent the entire Saturday without checking my emails or thinking about work, and guess what? Nothing fell apart. On the contrary, I felt renewed. Carla also began using her breaks to reconnect with parts of herself that she had neglected. I remembered that I used to love to draw when I was younger. I always said I didn't have time, but in reality, I was filling my time with things that weren't essential. So I bought a sketchbook and started doodling. It's nothing grand, but it makes me happy. The psychologist made an encouraging comment. That's wonderful, Carla. You're rediscovering who you are beyond your responsibilities. It's a sign that you're building a more balanced life. Carla still faced challenges, such as moments of relapse when she felt tempted to fall back into her old pattern of filling every minute of her day. But instead of judging herself, she began practicing self-compassion. I'm learning to be kind to myself. On the days when I can't slow down, I remind myself that it's part of the process. At the end of the session, Carla shared, I'm still at the beginning of this journey, but I can already feel the difference. I'm more present, less anxious, and for the first time in years, I feel like I'm in control, but in a healthier way. And you know, I think I'm starting to enjoy having these moments just for me. The psychologist concluded with a message. That's the beauty of balance, Carla. You don't have to be perfect. The important thing is that you're learning to live in a way that respects your needs and boundaries. That's something that will grow over time. Carla left the office that day feeling more confident than ever. She knew she still had a long way to go, but she also knew she was equipped with the tools and mindset to continue her transformation. The therapist ended the session with Carla, but her transformation was a reflection of something bigger. What she was learning wasn't just about slowing down, but about taking back control of her life, one step at a time. As Carla moved toward balance, her story held valuable lessons for anyone who feels trapped in the cycle of being busy. If you can relate to Carla, the psychologist begins, looking directly into the camera, if you feel like your schedule is never empty because it can't be, or if you feel like stopping is like wasting time, I want you to know that you are not alone. Many people fall into the cycle of staying busy as a way to avoid dealing with what really matters, their emotions, their fears, and even their own needs. He pauses, allowing the words to resonate. Carla's story is a clear example of how constantly being busy doesn't mean you're in control. Often it's the opposite. When you feel compelled to fill every minute of your day, you may be running away from something deeper. So I want you to ask yourself, what are you trying to avoid when you obsessively fill your schedule? Is it the fear of appearing incapable, the anxiety of not being enough, or maybe it's the habit of measuring your worth by what you do rather than who you are? The psychologist adjusts his tone, making it more encouraging. The good news is that you can break out of this cycle. It doesn't have to be a huge leap. It starts with small steps, like Carla's. Take 5 minutes out of your day to ask yourself how you're feeling. Don't try to solve everything at once. Just observe and allow yourself to exist without the need to do. Remember, slowing down is not a sign of weakness. It's an act of courage. By creating spaces to pause, you're not only giving yourself a physical break, but also an emotional and mental one. These moments allow you to reconnect with yourself and discover what really matters. The psychologist smiles slightly, encouraging the audience. Carla learned that balance is more than saying no to what's not essential. It's also saying yes to what really matters. Your peace, your well-being, your happiness. You can do the same. If you want to start now, do this. Set aside 5 minutes today to do nothing. Turn off your cell phone, find a quiet place and just breathe. If your mind starts racing, that's okay. Just observe your thoughts without judging them. That's the first step to regaining control. Carla's journey is a reminder that being busy is not the same as being productive, and that slowing down can be the secret to living a more meaningful life. Balance doesn't happen overnight, but every little step you take can lead you to a lighter, more connected, and happier life. He looks into the camera with a knowing look. Share in the comments. How do you deal with your busy routine? Have you tried to stop for a few minutes? Your experience may inspire others who are trying to do the same. And if you like this story, subscribe to the channel for more content like this. We're on this journey together. With that, the psychologist ends the video, inviting the audience to reflect on their own relationship with time and priorities. Carla's story is not just an individual lesson, but a call to action for everyone who feels trapped in the cycle of excessive productivity. Because in the end, slowing down isn't losing, it's gaining life back.